All right, we are waiting for the president to address the troops in Tampa, Florida. He's at CENTCOM. And all of this at a time where the president is sort of reprioritizing what used to be our obsessions when it comes to foreign policy. For example, Russia being lethal enemy #1. He's saying he can work with Russia. He thinks he can work with Vladimir Putin, and he thinks he can use Vladimir Putin and Russia to thwart ISIS and other terror groups around the world. Peter Brooks, the former Bush 43 defense official, on that. Peter, what do you make of that theory? He has been consistent with it and on it. Even at the same weekend, we had the likes of Mitch McConnell saying, no, this guy Putin's a thug. Don't put your trust and hopes in him. What do you think?
Well, I think it's fair to test the diplomatic intentions of any country. I mean, the United States isn't around the world looking for enemies. We're looking for friends and people that help to protect and advance our national interests. But depending on the country, you have to proceed with caution. So I don't think there's anything wrong. I mean, the Bush administration did this, the Obama administration. It depends on how you go about it. I mean, I didn't have a problem with the reset policy, which I think turned into regret after 8 years of the Obama administration. But the way they did it, you know, the Obama administration decided to give a lot of things away. They gave up missile defense in Eastern Europe. The New START treaty, the New Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, which meant we took the reductions and the Russians didn't. The retrenchment from our involvement overseas, which allowed the Russians to get involved in Syria. I think there were a lot of mistakes there, but if we can get along with countries and we don't give up our interests, I don't see any real problem with that. But there may be other issues. There may be, you know, moral issues. There may be human rights issues. But in general, it's okay to test the diplomatic intentions of a new country, especially at the beginning of a new administration.
This would be more than a test, though. This would be, at least for Republicans in particular, a 180 from their typical position, which even Democrats have said is sort of set in a Cold War mentality. Do you agree with that?
Well, I have concerns, too, and I think you and I have probably discussed it at times in the past.
Indeed.
About with Russia. So, I mean, yeah, like I said, it's okay in theory to do this. You have to be careful. You have to understand what you want. I mean, there are talk now that they're trying to peel the Russians off from the Iranian-Russian relationship.
How likely is that, Peter? That relationship has been decades in the making. I cannot see them suspending that altogether to cozy up to us, but I could be missing them.
Well, look, I mean, this is theoretical. You have to test the theory. Iran and Russia, Neil, are natural rivals. You know, they basically kind of border the same areas of Central Asia. They've been pushed together. It's a marriage of convenience, not of love. You know, there's reasons. There's Syria. They both have strong interests there. There's the weapons sales. The Russians have sold the Iranians a lot of weapons. And, of course, there's anti-Americanism. They both see the United States as a major obstacle to them being the regional dominant power, or the regional hegemon, whether you're talking about the Persian Gulf or there. So, but once Syria is resolved, if it ever gets resolved, they're likely to go back to being rivals. They're certainly rivals on the energy front. So there's reasons to look at this as a possibility. It's the same as keeping Russia and China apart as allies in opposing the United States.
Well, you just hit on what I was going to follow up on, this idea that China is our bigger enemy. And as long as I've talked to known Donald Trump, I'm going back decades where he has bemoaned and worried about China rigging its currency, playing games in the South China Sea. Just lately now, the Defense Secretary of the United States raising hackles about populating those islands that we argue technically belong to Japan. They argue the Chinese to them, and then they quickly militarize them. That we actually, with the Russians, share a greater contempt and worry for China than each other. Do you agree with that?
Well, there is that. They have a long history there, obviously, the Chinese and the Russians, and they have a long border. And the Russians are very concerned about the rise of China in that neighborhood. I mean, they had an alliance, you know, early on after the Cold War that fell apart. President Nixon took advantage of that, certainly, to place Russia and China in opposite. So this sort of, you know, geostrategic games can go on, and you can be very successful with it. So I think we have to be open-minded of this new administration. I mean, they've been in office a few weeks now, and seeing what they're thinking about, as long as they're protecting and advancing American interests. I think that's something we should look at.
Peter, it's always great talking to you. I always learn something, my friend. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Neil.